start by saying a very warm welcome to you all. It is such a pleasure to see so many of you here for our Black History Month WINspiration, and we have a very special one indeed in store for you today. So a tiny bit of feminist housekeeping first. My name is Kirsten. I'm Membership Officer for CILIP Scotland. So if you need anything at all, don't hesitate to send me a direct message in the chat. Please, could you keep your mics on mute for now? This is just so that we're able to hear our speaker until we come to the Q&A section a little bit later. Cameras, you're welcome to leave them on or off. It's lovely to see your faces. If you're struggling with bandwidth at all, we would suggest off. And just as you're aware, we are recording the session. So if you'd rather, it will be in speaker mode, but if you'd rather not appear at all, you're welcome to have your cameras off as well. Captions are enabled, so you can turn them on or off using the controls at the bottom of your screen. And you're already making great use of the chat box, which is wonderful. So continue to say hello. Any questions throughout, please pop them there. It's a really unique opportunity to learn today and to come together. So please, yeah, do make the most of it and feel free to ask questions. Now, I'm going to confess that I had never heard of Dorothy Porter until I read an article written by today's speaker. And I was astonished that her vast, varied contribution to our profession isn't better recognised. And it made me wonder what that said for us as much as our collections, about the histories we think we know, whose stories are excluded and why. So to introduce her and her story, I will first introduce you to our wonderful speaker who's joining us from the other side of the Atlantic and very early in the morning too, which is a testament to her passion for sharing Dorothy Porter's work. So Professor Zita Cristina Nunes is Associate Professor of English at the University of Pennsylvania, where she teaches and conducts research in the areas of comparative African-American, African diaspora literature, literature of the Americas, and literary theory. She's currently a Mellon Fellow at the Price Lab for Digital Humanities, and she's the author of Cannibal Democracy, Race and Representation in the Literature of the Americas. Zita is also completing a book manuscript titled Racism in Translation, Multilingualism, Comparative Literature, the Harlem Renaissance. So we can't wait to hear more about that too. Like Dorothy Porter, she is an inspiration, or rather a WINspiration to us all. So Zita, thank you so very much for joining us. Whenever you're ready, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kirsten, for the lovely invitation to join you for me this morning. And thank you to the audience. It's wonderful to know that there's so much interest in Dorothy Porter and in Dorothy Porter's work. I'm going to speak for a very short time because I want to leave enough time for questions and for conversation. I don't know how many of you had a chance to read my article on Porter that prompted this invitation. So I'm just going to go over some of the main points and then open the floor. My goal in this talk is that you'll leave today eager to learn more about Dorothy Porter and others like her throughout the world who have long worked to foster Black studies, along with working to develop the appropriate critical frameworks for this material. So before, excuse me, I start talking about Dorothy Porter's life and work, I'd like to say a word about how I first learned to appreciate the deep significance of it. Early in my career, before taking my first academic job, I worked at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture at the New York Public Library, which is probably the most widely known of our specialized libraries here on Black culture here in the United States. The foundation of that library is a library and collection that was put together by the Afro-Puerto Rican Arturo Schomburg. And that collection is deservedly celebrated as an extraordinary achievement. And his work has received a great deal of attention that has overshadowed the work of earlier collectors during the 19th century, whose whose libraries have formed the foundations of many at HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, as well as other institutions of higher learning. And that attention has also eclipsed the work of librarians and archivists like Dorothy Porter. These librarians and archivists are mentioned. There are many women among this group, but they're mentioned, but their work has not been extensively studied, and there's a lot of work yet to be done in this area. So after leaving New York, where I taught at a university for a number of years, I moved to Washington, D.C. To take up another position. And I was in the middle of a project that required archival research in several languages. And I decided to visit Howard University, a sentimental journey as much as an intellectual one. My father graduated from the medical school. And when I walked into the library, and maybe Kirsten, you might put up the slides now. If you, here, just if you go to the next slide, I'm sure all of you will laugh to hear that. If you go to the next one first. So this is the Founders Library on Howard University's campus. The Moorland-Spingarn collection that I'll talk about that Dorothy Porter developed is housed in this building. The next slide, Kirsten. So I was delighted when I walked into the building, and in an anteroom before going into the reading room, all of the card catalogs are lined up against the walls. And to me, this is a researcher's dream. Inside these drawers, I found rarities that I had searched for in South America, Brazil. I had gone to the Caribbean looking for sources. I found material there that I had not found anywhere else in other libraries in the United States or abroad. These cards were marked with information about the authors, including using the language of the time, whether the author was a Negro author or not. Priceless to me were the notations on these cards, whether the writers used pseudonyms. There were cross-references, notations leading to other sources on the back, handwritten notes that might help a researcher in terms of directions to other sources or other names. So as I went through these card catalogs, I was interested in the material, but then I became fascinated by who would do all of this work and who would set this material, this information up in a way to make it most useful and most usable by a researcher. Who was it that was producing all of this material in Black studies? So if you go to the next slide. That's the reading room. That's pretty much what it looks like today. I asked so many questions of the librarians that they finally directed me to an oral history. And if you'll go now to the first slide, Kirsten. to the oral history of the librarian and archivist responsible for putting together the card catalog that I had gone to. So these are photographs of Dorothy Porter, just to give you a sense of her. So the top photograph shows her next to a student in that reading room. The books are arranged much as they were when she was there. The painting over the fireplaces of Jesse Spingarn, who was whose library provided one of the foundations to the collection that's at what is now called the Moorland-Spingarn collection. There's another photograph of Dorothy Porter at her desk. The painting is by Dorothy Porter's husband, James Porter, who was a painter and an art critic, also on the faculty at Howard University, just a very important painter. This portrait of her is at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. And then the photograph below the painting is by Carl van Vechten, who was a photographer, a philanthropist, a wealthy white patron of the Harlem Renaissance, a movement, a flourishing of Black arts during the 1920s. And he photographed most of the significant figures, artists, writers, scholars, actors, performers who played important roles during the Harlem Renaissance. And Dorothy Porter was among this group. And this is a photograph that he took of her. So would you take the slides off the screen? Or unless maybe we'll just leave it so everyone can continue to see Dorothy Porter. So as I said, I asked so many questions of the librarians that they directed me to her oral history. And I was hooked as I read how she described in detail how she came to develop the goals and methods that she used to develop what eventually would become the Moorland-Spingarn Research Center. Dorothy then Burnett graduated from Howard University in 1926. She had been raised in a middle-class, racially mixed but largely white town in New Jersey called Montclair. Her father was a physician. He had graduated from Howard University, and her mother was an excellent tennis player who was very well connected among sort of intellectual and activist women, many of them connected to Howard University. At Howard, as an undergraduate, she had studied languages and literatures with the polyglot Edward Christopher Williams, a professor of language and literature, head of the Department of Languages and Romance Languages and Germanic languages. But he was also a trained librarian. He had taught library studies at Case Western Reserve, another university, and then had gone to the top as a librarian and faculty member at the most prestigious Black high school. It's hard to overstate the impact of that high school in the production of the Black intelligentsia in the, well, in the United States, because the graduates would go all over. From that school, called the M Street School, and then the Dunbar School was also a feeder to Howard University. He left the M Street School, became a librarian at Howard, and also a professor, and served as an inspiration, as a mentor to Dorothy Porter. He hired her after she graduated as an undergraduate from Howard, and encouraged her to continue her studies as a librarian at Columbia University. So at that time, as in many institutions of higher learning in the United States, women, well, male and female Black students could not live in campus housing. And so Dorothy Porter would study during the summer, commuting from New Jersey to take her classes. And she received her undergraduate degree and her master's degree in library sciences from Columbia University in 1931. There's some discussion about whether it was 1931 or 1932. But she was the first Black student to graduate with an MA from the library school. E.C. Williams, he was known as E.C., passed away while Dorothy was completing her studies at Columbia, and she became the head librarian in 1930. No small feat for a woman at that time. It's a testament to the sort of the impact that she had already had, that she took on an administrative position of that significance. There were many women librarians in Black institutions, libraries, and at universities, but fewer in administrative positions. And so this was a significant acknowledgement of her skills and the impact that she had already made at Howard. So I've mentioned before that the library was built on two collections. So the first one was donated by J.E. Moorland in 1914. He was a Black theologian who had graduated from Howard, and at that time he was a trustee of the university and a very good friend of the dean at the time. This was also during this period that Howard had its first Black president. So together, the administrators at the university worked with Moorland, who had was generally acknowledged to be the largest and most significant collection of Black-related materials. This collection included significant materials related to the history of slavery and to the Black church. In putting together this collection, Moorland had been driven, like other collectors of the 19th century, especially during the Reconstruction period, After the formal end of slavery, these collectors were driven to document, preserve, and study Black history and culture as a, to preserve it as a record, but also to make it available for study as a source of truth for a Black leadership, a Black readership. Moorland collection was the first to be donated. There were smaller collections that were already at the library. But then in 1946, through Porter's efforts, Howard University acquired the very large personal library of Arthur Spingarn, who was a white lawyer and member of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. He was a prominent collector of books by and about Black people. He was also wealthy and funded prizes for writers and artists of the Harlem Renaissance. So he was a promoter of the Harlem Renaissance as well. So in time, using her determination, begging, borrowing, or stealing, Porter's nickname was the bag lady, because she never traveled anywhere without a bag, on the off chance that she might cajole someone into making a donation or providing some material for the library, at a rate that she could afford with the limited funds available to her. So using these methods over the time of her leadership at the library, which lasted through the late 1960s, she amassed materials ranging from early modern periods through the 1960s in languages ranging from Latin. There were works in English and just about every European language, including Portuguese, Spanish, French, German. There's material in Arabic, in Asian languages, in many African languages as well, including Kiswahili, Kikuyu, Zulu, Yoruba, Vai, Ewe, Luganda, Ga, Soto, Amharic, Hausa, Xhosa, and Luo. So soon after Dorothy Porter took over the leadership of the library, she laid out a plan. She was a very meticulous keeper of records, and would make yearly reports about laying out her goals and measuring the extent to which they had been met. So in 1932, she laid out a plan for what was then called the Moorland Foundation, because Spingarn's collection had not yet been donated. And she outlined the institution's purpose. And I'm quoting from that document. 1, to accumulate, record, and preserve material by and about Negroes, which has not been given the recognition it deserves. To circulate, publish, and discuss historical information concerning the Negro, and thus contribute in a positive way to the enlargement of universal knowledge. 3, to develop a reference library for research workers in Negro life and history. 4, to instill or arouse race consciousness and race pride in Negro youth and direct its ambition towards research of the Negro past. To verify fact from fiction. 6, to make Moorland Foundation the basis for scholarly reconstructive excursions into Negro history and literature. A thorough researcher, Porter had consulted many libraries to discover their practices related to Black studies. Every library she consulted relied on the Dewey Decimal classification. And in light of the goals she had set out for the Moorland Foundation, Porter was actually enraged that libraries used the practice of listing known Black authors, no matter what the subject of the work, according to call numbers devoted to slavery. So as she explains in her oral history, I'm quoting, now in that system, the Dewey Decimal system, they had one number, 326, that meant slavery. They had one other number, 325 as I recall it, and that meant colonization. In many white libraries, every book, whether it was a book of poems by James Weldon Johnson, who everyone knew was a Black poet, went under 325, and that was stupid to me, close quote. Porter recognized that this framing reinforced racist conceptions. It reinforced the idea that Black people entered into the movement of world history only through slavery, and that we as Black people have nothing to contribute to scholarly conversations outside of that frame. From her point of view, a radical rethinking of this cataloging was necessary for scholarly and political reasons. Knowledge formation from her perspective was being unconscionably limited. Porter therefore classified works by genre and author to highlight the foundational role of Black people in all subject areas, which she identified as art, anthropology, communications, demography, economics, education, geography, history, health, international relations, linguistics, medicine, music, political science, sociology, sports, and religion. And those annotations that I had found so useful in the card catalog were not idiosyncratic. They were part of her system. She believed that scholars should have as much information as possible and that it was her duty to provide it. So the card catalog had was systematic in its presentation of this additional contextualizing and connective information. She said, it is important to be able to see at a glance at the shelves how many books are by Negro writers. These books can be marked in some way to show that the author is a Negro. On every catalog card for a book by a Negro author, the fact that the author is a Negro will be stated. It is felt that the fullest possible cataloging is necessary for this collection, as the catalog will provide, will furnish facts and information not in print. And then she adds, subject, author, and title, alphabetical subject index to the subject file, separate file for bibliography and fiction, because she realized that the field had not been organized yet in such a way that researchers would have an already organized and systematic access to materials across institutions. And so the extent that she was able to provide this, she did this for scholars, whether they be middle and high school students. She notes the use of the library by young people, the university students and scholars at Howard, other universities, and throughout the world. She notes in her documentation how many inquiries she received from Europe, from Africa, from Asia, from South America, scholars and colleagues in search of other information, that the Howard Library might have. She also conveys in her reports that her work with her fellow librarians, there were 4 other women librarians at the Moorland-Spingarn. She says that their work was followed with interest. She conveys that other librarians reached out to learn about her system and to see if they could adopt that system for their own institutions. She describes ongoing conversations with the Library of Congress, also in Washington, D.C., through which she helped them to identify and address gaps in their collection, and to she provided suggestions as to how they could revise cataloging practices. During her lifetime, leading scholars in the field of Black studies publicly stated their debt to her knowledge, scholarship, and willingness to change existing and limiting paradigms in order to help them produce their groundbreaking work. So just wanted to end by saying that it's past time that we do the same. So thank you, and I'd love to open this up now and hear your questions and comments.
Oh, well, Zita, very well said. And I think that echoes how we're all feeling. It's more than past time. And I've noted down so much, I've learned so much today. I'm sure that's the same for all our attendees, but that goals document, that's really going to stick with me, that material that's not being given the recognition it deserves, and to verify fact from fiction. It's a real kind of activist-driven, unapologetically political in the best possible sense understanding of librarianship. There's a real power behind that, and I think we're still harnessing that today and still learning how to do that. So she's such an inspiration. Thank you.
Yes. So in sort of response to what you just raised, I spoke of the Harlem Renaissance. I don't know if that is a movement that is familiar to all of you in the audience, but it was a movement that had a tremendous impact in not only in the United States, but in the Caribbean and other areas where Black writers and artists turned to the cultural sphere to address questions of representation, including limited political representation. The goal of the movement was to shift from being sort of the subject of another's gaze and another's attempts to explain, define, monitor, control, and to take on the work of self-representation, setting the terms of conversations and in political and aesthetic, and one of the sort of most famous articulators of this movement was Alain Locke, who was at Howard University, and who was acknowledged his debt to to Dorothy Porter and the work that was being done at the library for providing the materials that would inform this significant movement. And so her work had reverberated in so many different spheres. Her work and of other librarians at similar institutions, but hers was particularly impactful.
Absolutely, that's so, it gets such a strong sense of that from what we've learned today. That reverberation is just the perfect word, these kind of ripples on a pond, and even if they've been unacknowledged, the impact is undeniable, which is wonderful. So please do, everybody, put your questions in the chat if you've got any, or feel free to raise your hand, either physical or virtual hands, and then we'll kind of make the most of a Q&A. We won't be asking Zita to get up this early again to join us, so please do take the opportunity of having her here. I actually did have one question just while people are thinking of things, and it was actually about the Dorothy Porter oral history. Where did the idea, or the history of the history, I should say,
yes,
did she decide to do this herself? Did the library invite her to do it? What are the kind of origins of that?
No. At the oral history was conducted at the library. I'm looking to see if I can remember the name of the person who did it. But it was done at the Moorland-Spingarn library by a scholar toward the end of her career. And it was done over the course of several weeks, and you get a sense of a very, like someone who had a lot of character and was very funny and outspoken, and a very intelligent and determined person. This comes across on the page as someone with a wry sense of humor, and very discerning, a very discerning person. And so the oral history is there, and she was asked to participate in a number of interviews over her career from the 50s onward. She granted several interviews that have a lot of information. She also published herself articles about other collectors and librarians. She wrote about the importance of collecting. She put together bibliographies, annotated bibliographies that are tremendous, and guides as well. So there's a lot of information about her. Her papers are at Yale University. Very little of it has been, there's so much that the few scholars that have researched and written about her have only touched the surface of that material. I myself have also only looked at a small percentage of that collection. I've been approached about doing a biography, and that would give me sort of the opportunity to go through more of the material. Her daughter, she and James Porter had a daughter. They married in 1929. Their daughter also had a collection of her mother's papers that she donated to the Broward County Library. That's in Florida. That's where the daughter lived, and Dorothy Porter moved to be with her daughter at the end of her life. She became ill after the death of her second husband. His name was Wesley, famous Black historian, also at Howard. And the daughter donated the papers, which have not yet been cataloged. And apparently that's also a substantial archive of Dorothy Porter's materials. So there's a lot there that can be worked with.
Amazing. I think thumbs up from us all for that biography. That would be utterly fascinating. And I think when you think of how much has been written about and reflected on with figures like Dewey, the fact that this is that material, these sort of untold riches are there and haven't been explored yet, it's quite something. I was really struck there as well to learn that she married in 1929, and I think she took on her senior role in 1930, because actually the Scottish Library Association, it didn't even approve the temporary appointment of married women until 1939.
My goodness, yes. Well, I'm amazed when I reading the oral history, even the way she talks about her marriages, it was clear that she doesn't call herself, that I recall, a feminist, but throughout she's very dedicated to preserving her professional career and making it possible for other women professionals in the library setting to maintain their careers at a very high level as well. And there are moments where she talks about how she has to make a stand, to fight for her ability to dedicate the time that it takes to do this kind of work, the ability to travel. She and her husband would travel together, but she would also travel herself and to do collecting and to meet with other librarians and scholars in countries throughout the United States, but also throughout the Americas. She went to Africa. She served as consultants to libraries there as well. And this also influenced some of the work that she did. She did provide the bibliographies of Black women writers and scholars, contributed to encyclopedias of prominent Black women or women who had made contributions in a range of fields. She encouraged women scholars. So this was another area that was incredibly important to her. The professionalization of women librarians, Black women librarians, giving attention to working conditions, promotion, developing opportunities for leadership roles. These were all important to her as well.
Well, she's just a pioneer, whichever direction you turn, isn't she? I mean, these are still things that the profession's tackling today. So the thought that she was doing this 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, it's so powerful. And I can only echo Gillian's added into the chat. It sounds like such a fascinating area for researchers. Thank you for that. It absolutely is.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had another question about, I think you've mentioned in the card catalogues that some writers wrote under pseudonyms. And I'm not sure if we have anyone from the National Library of Scotland with us, but they have a great exhibition on at the moment called Pen Names.
Oh,
all about writers using pseudonyms and their different reasons for that. Do you think for the writers that Dorothy Porter was including, was that to overcome the racism of the existing system? And you mentioned that only 326, 325 were available, or were there other reasons? Do you have a sense of why they were writing with pseudonyms?
Yes, so there were a number of reasons. One is, there in the 19th century, in the 20th century, writers sometimes adopted pseudonyms in newspapers to write different genres of work, to protect themselves if they were writing particularly controversial or difficult materials, to distinguish roles. So maybe as an academic to write and use this name, but for other forms of writing, a different name. But the reason I was so grateful to her is the book I'm writing now is about a writer who was born in St. Vincent in the Caribbean in 1888. And he came to the United States in the early 20th century. And over like between say 1910 and 1930, he lived and wrote using a range of identities. They were more than pseudonyms. He used these different names to write in English, in Portuguese, and Spanish, and French, and in those writings, he would appeal to the racial and cultural logics of his audiences to advance an anti-racist agenda. And I encountered this writer, through a footnote in a book that I was writing. And it took a long time for me to put his various identities together, because he was very he was like a zealot figure. He was everywhere, but people didn't know. He didn't hide that he was all of these people, but in the archive, there weren't ways to obviously connect them. It took a lot of research. And it was one of Dorothy Porter's cards where she had a work by him that had on it that he was a Negro author, and then connected this work that was I believe it was in English, to another work in Portuguese. And it turned out that they were by the same person. And so it helped me to link up, like it was a step in linking up this writer to all of his other identities and all of his other writings in other languages, in a way that I hadn't been able to, because the conventions that she used were so thorough and so and anticipated the needs of a researcher who wanted information that was not necessarily valorized or seen as important or politically salient in other contexts. And I'm really interested in seeing this exhibit. I hope it has a digital component. because I'm interested in the pseudonyms and also the ways in which that can be that the taking on of pseudonyms can be so complex.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure somebody, I'm trying to think if there's a digital, if anyone from NLS is here, please do put the link and we'll try and get some information to you, because yeah, it's I know that I've just taken a lot of photos at the Radcliffe Hall and I'm a big fan of her, so that's why she's here. But oh gosh, it's so powerful, and I like that sense of actually you forming connections with Dorothy Porter as well. It's that dialogue through the ages as much as the cross genres. Yeah. It's so powerful. Gillian's asked a great question of whether the annotations and connective information on the card catalogues, has that been transcribed and transferred into the digital catalogue?
No, I don't. Because I don't know if it's possible that some of it has been. The cards have writing on the front and on the back. Some of them are stapled together. I know that, for example, the New York Public Library has, photocopied all of their card catalog into bound editions. But there's so many libraries that just shifted from card catalog to online or digital catalogs. And I don't know, if I were to continue this research, I'd be interested to know if there are other libraries or librarians that did this kind of work. But in my experience, it's unusual. I think Moorland-Spingarn has, maybe a function of resources as well. And in this case, a lack of resources combined with, I hope, it's probably a recognition of the significance of that card catalog, has meant that it's there and it's the first thing you see when you go into the library. There's also, even though there are finding aids and a lot of information available through the website, a lot of material has already been digitized. There's a lot at the library that you would know is there only by going to the center. But I encourage everyone to go and look at the website for the Moorland-Spingarn Research Center. There's material there that can be useful in any field, any period, and there are digital exhibitions and resources that are very interesting as well.
Amazing. I hope people will do just that, and we'll make sure that the link goes out to people afterwards as well. And Field has got a fantastic question as well, that they've read that Spingarn sold the collection to Howard and Porter came up with a method of valuing the collection. Are you able to tell us anything about that?
Yes. So this is Porter has a very humorous, though biting, description of this exchange. So when Spingarn was ready to transfer his collection to Howard, the president of the university said that it needed to be valued, but because according to Dorothy Porter, they didn't think that she was up to the task as a woman, librarian, that she would be able to produce a evaluation of the collection. And so they went to the Library of Congress to ask one of their librarians, a male librarian, a white male librarian, to value the collection for them. He immediately turned around and contacted Dorothy. He said, "I can't do this. I know nothing about this. Would you value this collection?" So she did, wrote it up, sent it to him. He sent it to Howard, and it was accepted. So this was one of her workarounds, but she made sure it was put down for posterity, the way that this had actually come about.
And well, it should have been. My goodness, her workarounds are inspiration for us now. Thank you. Wow, I think we've covered all the questions now, and I'm conscious of time because I know we're catching you between conferences, aren't we? We're so lucky to
yes. I was saying to Kirsten, it's very lucky that we scheduled this for early in the morning because it falls at a time when I have a conference as well. So I'm very happy to have had this hour with you.
Amazing. Oh, well, thank you. I know that I'm feeling utterly inspired. I'm sure that all our attendees are as well. So can everybody please just join me in thanking Zita so much. It's been the most WINspirational hour. And I think Dorothy Porter is a name, not just that we should all know, but that we should all say thank you to as a profession. And I know that you're working tirelessly to make sure that that's the case. So thank you for everything that you're doing to highlight her incredible contribution that's still rippling, that's still resonating into today, and I'm sure for tomorrow and for the future as well.
Thank you, and thank you very much for your attendance and your interest.